so are we ready?
This is Jay.
This is A.
And this is Moxicated,
where we drop the booze and walk through the reality of life alcohol-free.
So grab your favorite mock, get ready to laugh, and let's get Moxicated. Hello. Welcome.
How's it going?
Good, we're back in our chairs.
Yes, no more technical difficulties this week.
At least yet.
Yet.
Yeah, it's good. I'm having a good week. Just, we are filming at a different time, and
Yes.
This is after class. And I feel like I played a very good playlist in class today.
Oh, nice.
Because there's been some good music out lately. Well, actually, the Doechii song that just came out is very good for what we're talking about today. But before we get there, Lady Gaga just came out with a whole new album.
I'm not the biggest Lady Gaga fan.
But you are... what's her name? Dang it, and A Star Is Born. Allie.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it Allie?
Maybe. I do like that movie. Yes.
That's what made me like her, actually, is that movie. Because there was actually outside reasons for me not liking her. But I digress.
Yeah.
The cool thing, besides her just releasing an album, is I was just reading an article the other day, and her dad is sober. And he's going to be 5 years sober, which I thought was pretty cool. He was talking about how he and her used to party a lot on the road. Like, he used to accompany her, and so they were always drinking, and then he had a bunch of health problems, and she was the one that was like, sobriety is not overrated, it's not cool, Dad, like, you'll be fine. And so he's 5 years sober, and he owns an Italian restaurant, of course, in New York City, and now he carries all kinds of alcohol-free stuff.
Oh, well, that's cool.
At
least she has a cool dad.
Cool. Yeah, well, I think she's cool too, but I thought that was really cool.
That is.
And yeah, and then Doechii has a new song. You guys know I love her, and it's called Anxiety.
Oh.
And it actually is to the beat of one of my other favorite songs. If you knew me in, I want to say this was like 2012, 2011.
What song is
It's
that?
Somebody that I used to know.
Oh, I like that song.
Yeah, so it's like it has that little tune as the background. But yeah, it's so freaking good, and it's perfect for what we're talking about today, because we're talking about social anxiety.
Yes.
And social anxiety, I think everyone is obviously familiar with it. We're talking about it a little bit at the retreat that we were at this weekend, and so it's fresh on our brains. And when I was looking up social anxiety, I realized that there is not just like, social anxiety is not just a thing that happens, but there's actually social anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
With that being said, social anxiety, this is a first time, I think. What? So don't come for me, people of America. I understand. This little thing I'm about to read is from Wikipedia. So if somebody edited it, then come for them.
Peeps.
Social anxiety is the anxiety and fear specifically linked to being in social settings or interacting with others. Some categories of disorders associated with social anxiety can include mood disorders, eating disorders, substance use disorders. Individuals with higher levels of social anxiety often avert their gazes, show fewer facial expressions, and show difficulty with initiating and maintaining a conversation. Social anxiety commonly manifests itself in the teenage years, which I thought was very interesting, and can be persistent throughout life. However, people who experience problems in their daily functioning for an extended amount of time develop social anxiety disorder. So if this is something that you're experiencing nonstop, it's getting worse, or it's just continuing over time, then that's what they call social anxiety disorder. And the acronym for that is SAD. Like, it's literally sad. I was like, oh.
I know.
And another thing that it can be referred to as social phobia.
Okay.
Which I think if you put it as phobia, people might understand it a little better, because I think that some people are jaded to the word anxiety. And so when people are like, oh, I have social anxiety, it's not, people are like, oh, okay. But saying phobia, I don't know, that's like, yeah, like you have a fear of being in social situations, which, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once it develops into SAD, that is defined as a chronic mental health condition in which social interactions cause irrational anxiety. For people that have this disorder, everyday social interactions cause this irrational anxiety, fear, self-consciousness, and or embarrassment. There are more than 200,000 cases in the U.S. per year.
That sounds...
Just a little.
I feel like that sounds just about right.
I was thinking maybe even low.
Yeah. Well, no, because even like what you just said, like the fear, self-consciousness, and embarrassment, I think those are like very right on cue.
Yeah.
Like lacking confidence, like just, yeah.
Well, self-consciousness, yeah, you're all in your head. Something that we were learning about at the retreat that I think is like a really interesting perspective to look at social anxiety, and something that you and I know both experience, is the term ruminating.
Yes.
And so ruminating, which is so funny because it was described to us in two ways. And when I went to look up the definition, sure enough, both ways were right there. So the ruminating that we're talking about that happens to us is to go over in the mind repeatedly and often casually and slowly. Am I like hiding like Kim Kardashian?
No, I feel like now it will be less.
That'll be good. Sorry, the tree is attacking me, people. Okay, so to go over in the mind repeatedly and often casually or slowly. And then the other form of this word, quite literal, is to chew repeatedly for an extended period, or to chew again what has been slightly chewed and swallowed. Which, like, that's what ruminating is. Like, you've already let it out there, but yet you're going to sit back after a social situation and go over it over and over and over again. And it's like chewing what you already swallowed.
Yeah. I think
Like
of
a
this
bird.
weird episode of one of those like shows that on TLC that's like I'm like,
obsessed with this.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
and then I watched one where she would like chew up the food and spit it out and then chew it again.
I've heard people doing that for their children.
Yeah.
Yeah,
me
like called
too.
baby
Birds.
birding. Yeah,
Birds.
it's really called that. And yeah, I think too. I think everyone can experience levels of social anxiety, especially in the world that we're in. We've all developed different forms of social anxiety, but it can appear in all kinds of different ways. And believe it or not, there's also risk factors for having social anxiety disorder, and some of those are genetics, of course. An early traumatic event, if you are around other people that have it, which I thought that was so interesting. It's like very rarely do you get a disorder just because you're around someone else that has it. Like, can you imagine if all
you're gonna get it
just from being around them?
It's
but
contagious.
This one is obviously observing others.
Yes.
Your parenting style, the way you were parented, an isolated upbringing, brain structure, and societal expectations. All of those things, any of those things, and or can maybe put you at higher risk for having social anxiety disorder. As I'm looking at this list, I feel like I have like at least 4 of them, maybe 5. Risk factors. That doesn't mean that they all made me have social anxiety, but they sure are there.
Yeah.
And then some of the symptoms of having the social anxiety disorder can be blushing and sweating, shaking, lump in the throat, muscle tension and pain, racing heart, nausea or dizziness, avoidance, escape, the little thing that we put in our notes, it has pictures, and the lady is quite literally running out the door.
Yes.
Escape.
Run!
That's me.
And I'm this one sweating with my heart racing. I just sit through it, soaking wet.
Through it. So that's all kind of just social anxiety disorder as itself. I think that is hard enough to deal with. Like that alone, being nervous to do all of this stuff to the point where it is physically, emotionally affecting you. But then you add in alcohol to the mix, and it says here that if you are somebody that experiences SAD, that you can also experience substance use disorder at the same time. And I think in a lot of mental illnesses or neurotypical brains, there is a higher risk to have a substance use disorder. But this one, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, why you would have a substance use disorder
Yes.
if you also had extreme social anxiety or social anxiety disorder, because, like, the most common thing to reach for,
Yeah, is alcohol.
in general.
Personally, for my social anxiety, I always, like, but right before something, take a shot.
Yeah.
Like, right before I'm going to do it, okay, let's do this, and then I'll have,
Yes.
like, I did not believe that I could function without the liquid courage of a social setting for a long time.
And I don't think, honestly, for me, it, like, belief, I didn't think I believe I could. I honestly don't think I would have put myself in more than 75% of the situations I put myself in if I hadn't have had alcohol, because I really don't like going out. And I think it took me a long time of overcoming FOMO that was also brought on by drinking, because I knew how much fun or all the things people were doing while they were drinking, so I would have FOMO. So that would put me out, and the FOMO and the alcohol would put me out into the situation that I didn't want to be in the first place, and had, severe anxiety going into. And so the best and easiest thing to do is just drink.
Yeah. Lower your
Pre-game.
inhibitions.
Yeah.
I said that weird.
Feel the rain on your skin. Why did that song come to my brain? But even, like, drinking in the car on the way over there, like, as soon as Ubers became a thing, which was, like, really short-lived, since I didn't drink that long after all of the ride shares became popular, but I would drink every time I was in an Uber. I mean, obviously sometimes in my car too, but if I was taking an Uber, that was an excuse to have alcohol, to the pregame, to the bar, like, whatever I was doing, I always had alcohol in the car. And I never even asked the Uber driver, because, again, I wouldn't even talk to the Uber driver. That enough was a scary situation for me to be in, so having a drink in there.
And the polar opposite is me, who had my taxi driver, Einstein, who I did talk to. He was my best friend and knew everything about us.
Did you drink in his taxi?
Yeah. But no. But because usually he was taking me to bars, and so I wouldn't, like, bring a bottle to a bar.
Yeah.
And so I would just take a bunch of shots, right? Like, literally the second he pulled up, I'd be like, all right, last shot, let's go, come on, shot, and then jump in and get there and then drink once we got there. It was pretty rare we were going to a house, because in those times, most of the houses were, like, in the area, so we'd either, like, ride our bikes or walk or, I don't know.
I think it's interesting, too, because a lot of the pregame situations can be awkward, because you're at someone's house that you don't know, or everyone is standing around, and it's, like, before the drinking situation, or the drinking effects take effect. And I feel like looking back, and I'm thinking about all these situations as we get ready to go out, like, I would probably even drink more if I felt the awkwardness of a situation, or if I was somewhere where I didn't know the person.
Yeah.
Like, before we were going out, just because that alone was enough of a social anxiety situation before we even get to the bar.
Yeah. And I was thinking a lot today when I was like looking over it, like the social anxiety of meeting new mom friends. Like being sober, it's incredibly
Well, yeah. And I mean, I would not ever be able to do it because back when I was drinking, and that's why when I came out of drinking, I didn't know how to make friends, because that was the only way I could. When, you know, you have such severe social anxiety or any form of social anxiety, like talking to someone, like, and again, it comes out in all different forms. I think you and I both feel the heart racing, which I always think is so funny, and I was thinking about it the other day, because I teach spin, so cardio. A lot of people get their heart rates really high when they're working out, and mine just won't get high, and it's so frustrating because I would like to get my heart rate a little high. And I was in a social anxiety situation the other day, and I literally was like, I should have my Apple Watch on right now because I can tell that my heart rate is literally higher than any time I'm doing cardio. Anytime I'm working out, like, it's literally like it's so crazy how your body can have such a physical response. And I think when you drink, you don't feel that as much. Obviously, that's going to stop your heart rate. It's going to slow that, well, not stop it, but slow it way down. Even like the physical effects, not even like the mind, like the physical effects on your body. I would say maybe the one thing that drinking doesn't help in my situation is when I get my face turns red. And then drinking just makes it.
It's probably because you're allergic to it.
Turn more red.
Most people that turn red have an allergy.
I'm also allergic to social situations because my face turns red in those situations. And then drinking,
blushing,
I'm sure amplifies it.
That was one of the things, blushing. Yeah.
And so and then drinking would just amplify that for me. So I think it's so interesting to think of, would I have put myself in these situations before without alcohol? What would my friendships have looked like?
How do you handle social anxiety now? What do you do?
I literally shake.
Yeah.
And I just shake through it. And I think that and that's something that comes with when you get really uncomfortable by making a choice to not drink alcohol, is like you kind of get used to being uncomfortable.
Yes.
I've had situations, where I've had to deal with the PTSD of it all and having to go into situations where I'm shaking and stuff, and I feel like I just go in it and pray that they don't see me shaking. Yeah.
I experienced at the retreat, like, literally my heart, beating out of my chest. And I didn't even speak. I, was thinking I was going to speak, but then I didn't. And literally, I felt like you could, see my shirt moving. We need to do a social experiment where we take, one of those little finger things and just, check our pulse. Know the pulse.
My oxygen is low. They're like, oh, okay, she's about to die.
My ears get really hot.
Oh, interesting.
They do. It's weird. And the other night I was having a panicking situation, and I was like, oh my God, my ears are gonna burst into flame. And Chris's grandma was like, what? And I was like, I don't know, they're just so hot right now.
Well, and there's so many different situations, like you just mentioned, a birthday party, there's moms, kid events, there's so many different situations where you can feel social anxiety. The Gateway Foundation put together a little list for us. These are a bunch of common situations that if you are someone that experiences social anxiety disorder, you will have difficulty with: talking to strangers, dating, speaking in public, making eye contact, entering rooms, going to parties, participating in job interviews, using public restrooms, eating in front of other people, initiating conversations, going to school or work. There's things on this list that you're like, duh. And then there's things on this list that you're like, oh my gosh, I would have never thought about it that way, but it's so true. Which ones stood out to you?
Well, a few that do not give me anxiety stood out, like talking to strangers.
Definitely, you like to do that.
Yeah, I would rather talk to strangers than people that I know.
It's so interesting that you have more social anxiety with
I think the fear of judgment and the self-conscious and confidence, like, I think confidence is a huge thing that comes with social anxiety. And I think, too, you can almost, like, when you're talking to a person before, you can see it in their confidence. Like, when they're like, I have social anxiety, and I'm like, I could tell.
Interesting.
Which I feel like that also sounds kind of judgy at the same time.
Well, I think it can be true just because I think social anxiety shows up in so many people in so many different ways. Like, I feel like I've seen not so many, but I've seen girls get up and be so secure in who they are and still feel that, but you just can't see it.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show, like, how many people experience this. I think that 2 that stood out to me were eating in front of other people and using public restrooms. I've experienced social anxiety for both of those things, and using public restrooms is something that I feel very proud that I got over. But, like, I always used to make fun of boys, right? Because I'm like, what does it sound like in a boys' restroom? They don't care. They're just noises being made.
Yeah.
Any noise in a female restroom would make me, like, coming from me, would make me feel like everyone thought it was like a microphone to the noise that was being made. And I think that comes from females feeling judged for doing human things.
Yes. Try having feet tattoos installed.
Because people can always know who
they
it is.
always know. And
you can't let anything
And that's
out.
because I look at people's feet. I'm like, oh, I know those shoes. Literally rude.
And that's, so that can bring on anxiety of having to go to the restroom. And eating in front of people was always, I remember, like, when I read this list, I got this memory. It was not something that I had fresh in my mind, but I went back to Hoover Middle School and the cafeteria and, like, not wanting to eat or, like, holding my fingers in front of my mouth because I had braces. And food got stuck in front of your braces. And also just, like, the act of eating as a girl in the 2000s when you just wanted to be sexy didn't seem sexy. Like, females were not allowed to use the restroom or eat food, just normal things. Yeah. And it felt so shaming. I guess even to myself, the guilt trip that I would put on myself, that it's like it causes anxiety. That's crazy.
That is.
That something like this can. And so, again, like, some more examples of the physical symptoms that people can feel: nausea, trembling, rapid heartbeat, muscle tension. I feel like sometimes, like, here, these muscles, I know I'm a fitness instructor, but I don't know what my muscles are called.
No, yeah, and I think a very common thing that people say all the time is, I'm going to throw up.
Yeah, I'm going to throw up.
I'm going to throw up. I cannot walk in there because I'm going to throw up.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's a very common one that a lot of people relate anxiety to.
Yeah, and I've never thrown up, but I have dry heaved a lot. Like, when the anxiety hits a certain peak, I just, like, almost throw up, but I've never actually thrown up, which is very nice.
Yeah.
Lightheadedness, inability to catch breath. I'm gonna faint. Yeah. Well, muscle tension is interesting too, because it's like clenching your teeth. Think of how many people clench your teeth
right before
or your jaw.
I'm about to walk into a setting. Like, my back will get so tense.
So tense.
And I won't even realize it. And it's like, even when you go into a yoga class and they're like, release your shoulder, and you're like, I didn't even realize
they're all the way up here, and you're like walking
and it's like, okay,
yeah,
like, no one's looking at you, you can relax, because you really do, you are tense, and you have your tongue on the roof of your mouth, and then you're like, oh, whoa,
you're not breathing.
I didn't even know.
You're like falling over, timber.
Yeah.
The last 2 on here I thought were interesting. They listed as physical symptoms, but I think that these are things you wouldn't think of as symptoms necessarily, just things that happen. Extreme self-consciousness, like you're saying, not feeling confident, and excessive worrying. So it's just like your mind is now spiraling into
every day, all day.
Yeah, what you're worrying. So what are you worried about? All the stuff people are saying about you. That's where the self-consciousness comes in, and it's so excessive that it takes over the brain, and that's where the ruminating comes in after, right? Because you could have these symptoms before a situation, you can have them during a situation, and then there's after effects where like I'm trying to go to sleep and I'm just going over all of the things I did and said, and I feel like even today when I was taking a shower, I was going over something that happened 2 weeks ago, and I was like, girl, you gotta let that go. And it's so interesting that it's listed as a physical symptom.
Yeah.
The last thing that physically can mess with you is your sleep.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, I mean, I think it's more than just like, oh, I'm going over everything I said and did before I'm going to sleep. Like, your nervous system is so elevated that
you can't regulate.
You can't regulate. You can't close your eyes. You can't, get your body to shut down long enough to actually go into REM sleep.
Yeah.
And it's just so sad. It says you may have physical anxiety symptoms or immediately before, or spend weeks, just like I said, brooding over it. I think that I can still think of things I'm embarrassed about when I was like young.
Oh, so many things.
And it just makes you feel sad, because this happens to everybody, and so many people are thinking back on all of their things that they've said and done. And yeah, we remember. I hate that thing that's like nobody remembers. Yeah, people do remember stuff, obviously. Some of us have crazy memories. But maybe someone remembers something that you said or did, but they're not ruminating over it like you are about it.
Yeah, totally.
They're not sitting there going, oh my God, I can't believe she did this over and over and over again. Even if they had that thought one time, they had that thought and it went out of their brain. Yeah. And we, however, are like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to forgive myself. Like 20 years later, I can't believe I did that one thing. That person still sees me that way or thinks of me that way. And then when you add drinking into the mix and all the things that you said or did while you were drunk, what you remember, what you don't remember, and you don't even know that you did when you were drunk, and what you said, and ruminating over that for lifetimes.
I honestly ruminate a lot.
Do you?
Yeah. And I'm
rumination.
I know, and I am a big advocate of like feeling the feels and letting it go. And I think that I've done that a lot in like my life now. But for some reason, a lot of past stuff, it's very hard. Like, and I'm like, no, like it doesn't matter. But then for some reason, it's still taking space.
You're holding on to it.
And I'm like, get away from me. Like, and it goes back to shame too. Yeah. Like, I think that's a huge player in it. And fear, just like all of it. And it's weird. And honestly, the thing that makes me ruminate the most is my period, like PMS. And I'm like, why am I thinking about something that I did months ago?
Yeah.
Years ago. When I was 13 years old, when I was 15. Like, it's not even only things that I did when I was drinking. It's like weird, quirky things random. That I did in elementary school.
Second grade, totally.
Yeah.
I have those too.
And it's like, why does my brain think it's okay to even think about those things right now? Like, it's such a head game, and it's annoying.
Yeah, it's almost like, and this is just coming to me now, as we move into like how we can overcome it. It's almost like when we have these thoughts, because we know now that, okay, I'm going to ruminate over it just a little bit, or I'm going to think about it and I'm going to release it. But we never knew that as kids. We never knew that as teenagers even.
No.
And so it's like now as it comes up, like almost we write it down, we burn it. We write it down, we burn it. And that's our way of like, because we couldn't do it then, we can do it now. We can find a way to stop the frickin' rumination because it's too frickin' much. And so some ways that you can overcome social anxiety, this verywell.com says celebrating small victories. And this is something you had asked me, what do I do? This is something that I've really started to implement, because one of my goals for this year, I've said several times, is to open myself up to newer relationships, newer friendships. And for someone that does feel this way and have some of these symptoms in social settings, like, I was terrified of like how that was going to look or how I was going to do that. Like at the same time, I'm figuring out who I am. I'm trying to give grace to myself, like when I need rest and all this stuff, but also like I'm also asking to put myself out there into situations. So I celebrate the small victories. If I do make a friend, or like Philip and I, it's actually really cute. If I call for an appointment or I do something like that, I'm like, I sent the drink back, or I called and made that appointment. Yeah. He's like, yeah, you did it. Like, yahoo. Because just doing that is, and celebrating that and having someone to celebrate that with me, it's small, it's tiny. Like a normal person might be like, that's stupid that you're celebrating that. But if it's big to you, celebrate it, because that's going to give you more confidence to go ahead and continue.
Yeah. I love that.
And that's another thing it says is like socializing, putting yourself in a situation, but like socializing around an activity so that you can maybe like dip your toes in there. You guys are doing something. It's really kind of funny that, because that makes me think of like our dating tips. When you go sober, like do an activity, because you're focusing on something. It's the same thing here. You're focusing on whatever that activity is, so it takes a lot of the anxiety out of it.
Yes.
Practicing self-forgiveness, which is kind of like the antidote to rumination.
Yes.
If you're sitting there ruminating, you are going to have to stop it and forgive yourself. Practice forgiving yourself for what you did in that moment and why you did that. Relaxation techniques.
Yes.
That is also something, I think, not just meditation, but just straight up breathing. Mm-hmm. If I'm about to go into a situation, maybe closing my eyes and taking some deep breaths, calming down, trying to freaking get that heart rate to stop racing. Yeah. Overcoming avoidance. That's a huge one. And I think that's goes hand in hand with the celebrating small victories. Like, you're gonna have to stop avoiding things. Not all at once. Don't do it to yourself all at once. Yeah. That's too scary. But like, what is something small that you can not avoid and then celebrate that you didn't avoid it? Cultivating self-compassion, similar to self-forgiveness. Working on communication skills, maintaining eye contact. See, I feel like I kind of have eye contact when other people are speaking to me, but when I'm speaking, I don't maintain eye contact as well. And that was always something they tried to teach me on the bike. And I don't know why when I'm in my moment, I divert my gaze.
Well, yeah, and I would be weirded out if the instructor was just staring into my eyes.
There's people that stare into souls during.
No, I would be like, look away.
And
sorry.
No, it's okay. It was funny that on here, a couple times on there, it was consider therapy.
Yeah.
Maybe if you are shaking so badly you want to vomit just because you're having an interaction with a stranger, therapy could help. It really can.
Truly, a lot of the treatments that I was reading was like talk therapy.
Yeah.
It wasn't like an intensive anything else. It was just talk therapy.
And then the last one on here is drop safety behaviors, and it just has like the X through booze basically. Because if you're going to rely on alcohol to get you through these situations, it's only going to intensify, and you're never going to be able to get through them.
Yeah. I had a couple other things on mine, like limiting the caffeine before, because your heart's already racing, and if you've had too much caffeine, you're just like, oh my god.
I'm okay.
No, and I've experienced, I think, that more lately because I've been drinking Americanos that have a lot more espresso than just a black coffee. And so I'm like, why is my heart racing? I'm like, oh, because I've had so much caffeine, I'm about to explode. And so I think that is something to be conscious of, especially if you are a sober girly like us. We're drinking coffee all the time.
Right.
And so before a social setting, maybe either have a decaf or have something else to
drink.
That's
such a good tip, and something that I would not think about because, or like you go out to a social setting and instead of drinking alcohol, you're drinking coffee, and by the end of like your second conversation, you're like
oh my God. Yeah. No, really. And it's like caffeine is a hell of a drug.
Oh, yeah.
I know I had a late night coffee. Chris was like, what is wrong with you? And I was like, I got it.
Living large tonight.
Living large. Sleep is a big one too. I feel like when you have less sleep, you're more, well, and for me personally, when I don't get good sleep, I'm more overwhelmed. I'm just more on edge. Everything, I'm triggered more easily. Like I have no patience. I like so many different things. And so it's like a good night's sleep too before a big social setting could be helpful.
Tuck yourself in.
Yeah. Tuck yourself in like a little taquito.
Yeah.
And then another one is physical exercise. And like, I don't know, for when my heart is racing, sometimes I'm like, I need to go for a walk, and don't have to sit there and like grab some weights and be like, oh, I'm going to get through this, or it's like, just go for a walk, get some fresh air, like figure out how you regulate your nervous system. And for me, going for a walk, like even a 5 minute, like change the scenery.
A 5-minute walk does so much for your mental and physical.
Yeah. It's very helpful for me.
I also wonder, it would be interesting to look into how heart health is affected by anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
Because it obviously does, your heart rate does increase in these situations where you're experiencing anxiety. So what a healthy heart does while experiencing an anxiety episode versus a non-healthy heart would be very interesting.
I have written on here for some of the things for me, how to work on certain things, because when I'm very anxious in a social setting, I've talked about it many times, I just start talking. And like right now in the phase that I'm in, I do, like, I have silence is okay. Like in a lot of places, like it's okay if there's silence. Like you don't have to fill that hole with some weird thing. And that like it might feel uncomfortable, but like you said, like being uncomfortable is a huge part of life. Totally.
It's something that's interesting is that's another thing that they tried to teach on the bike, because when they were teaching instructors would want to talk the whole time. But as somebody that is getting instructed, you don't want to hear the person talk the whole time, but you don't realize that when you're up there because you're feeling your anxiety and you're like, oh my gosh, the silence, like everyone's going to think this is my fault because of the silence. But then when you sit back and look at it as an observer, and it's almost like doing this in a conversation, people aren't feeling the silence as much as we think they are, or as much as the anxiety is telling us they are. And there's not as much need for that space to be felt, but our anxiety is like, you better talk right now. You better fill this space with words.
Make a joke. Do something. Make fun of yourself. Make people laugh.
Talk about cigarettes.
Yeah, that's all I do. Which, real quick, so I was just at a 90th birthday party, and they pulled out this newspaper that he was in. It was Chris's grandpa, and they had a full page on cigarettes, and I started talking with all of these people who do drink alcohol and do smoke cigarettes and talking about how alcohol is slowly going in the same path as cigarettes has gone. But this article literally said it is okay for women to smoke cigarettes. It is okay for teenagers to smoke cigarettes. Like all this stuff. And the article was from 1935 and it was insane. I took a picture of it just to like read it all and like how it was okay and like different things like to smoke cigarettes at this time will be healthier than at this time of the day. Just like different things. And it made me think like drinking after work is more like I don't know. It was just so interesting.
Well, and cigarettes play into, I think, what you mentioned for your social anxiety.
Yeah.
that was something. It's almost like that was the activity.
Yeah, like I got to get out of here. I'm going to go smoke a cigarette.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're escaping.
Yeah,
it's your activity to kind of go and excuse yourself and recollect yourself. But also, like, I think that is like an icebreaker too, and a lot of. I'm thinking back to like when you smoked.
Yeah.
That was an icebreaker for a lot of people, just like standing around. Then you can
I'd be like, all right, let's go. Does
Yeah.
anybody else smoke a cigarette?
Yeah.
Let's get out of here.
Yeah.
Let's go outside, smoke a cigarette.
Well, and it just goes to show again that this presents itself so many different ways in so many different people. I am so quiet and very much not a quiet person, but in social settings, I am too quiet, and I feel like I need to start talking more. So you and my goals are completely different for our social anxiety. But it's so funny that the physical effects of this hit us the same.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, what I was noticing when we were in those social settings a couple weeks ago. Like, oh my gosh, we had the exact same feeling physically, almost emotionally going into them, but how our bodies or our heads or whatever reacted to them was completely different. And it just goes to show that anybody can experience this, and anybody can be experiencing this at any time. And some people out there might just be not nice people, but for the most part, I ask on behalf of a introverted, which is different than social anxiety, but I feel like I am an introverted person with social anxiety. If there is a quiet person, do not think that they are mean. They might just be having severe anxiety in the moment, and their heart is beating, and they're shaking like a leaf. And also, if that's something that you experience, you're not alone. And knowing that reaching for alcohol is not going to help or not going to make it better. But there is other things that you can do.
Yes.
So you're not alone, and keep doing you. We love you, babes.
Talk soon.